Hey, Amy, it's great to see you again.
Good to see
Thank
you
you
too,
for
John.
thank you for answering more of my questions this time.
Yes.
Um, we spoke last time about the model, and I was really interested to know where the model began, how it started, how it's developed. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I sure can. And I think that the best place to start is we can't say exactly when the model began, but it's about control. So it's where control began. And we could say it's as old as time, but I don't believe that controlling another or controlling ourselves in a way of holding ourselves back or so on. I mean, of course, we are in control when we're doing something in our life. That makes sense. But I don't think that it's an attribute that's natural to humans. So we actually are more free and more expansive. But at the beginning of my book, I say we desperately want to be right. And then I say much of the world went ill governed on that very string of words. And I think that that's where we start in with this idea of I could go back to paganism, where they're trying to explain how things work on in the earth, and they realize we cycle with the earth. We're more tired when the sun isn't up as long, and so on. And so we made these correlations, right? And then we have a bunch of religions come in. 1,300 years ago, Judaism, and Christianity, of course, 2,000 years ago, and Islamic faith in about 1,400 years ago. And I would say that my sense is, and I do have a background in religion a bit, is that those set the tone and clinch something that was already going on. We already had hierarchies happening, established in the world. I'm top, I'm the king, I'm the leader, I'm the so on. And some cultures, though, understood it as everybody has their place in the culture, but they weren't asserted that place. They found that place. A good example of that is in their Native American tribes. I only know this from a friend that told me about a book she read, so that's kind of silly, but
Mhm.
that during the pioneers moving in and all of the fighting, sometimes children or adults would end up with tribes, rightfully or wrongfully, but that's it. And the people would actually be held without much leeway until they showed a specific skill set that was workable within the fiber of the tribe. And so I think that that's where we can see we're headed to something like that in the future. What is beyond the model and this control? So I think religion kind of clamped down on that. And there are some scholars in the U.S., and this might be controversial for people. So just think about it a while and take it in and set it down. And is they have come to realize that religion, and I'm going to say certain parts of religion in Christianity, even Judaism, and the Muslim faith have some element of an abuse model, particularly for women. And to me, that is hierarchical. It's
Mhm.
not the patriarchy. To me, the patriarchy is actually caught into the hierarchy, and that's the problem. So it itself is kind of a secondary problem. The hierarchy is the problem. So I hope that helps. And then we move into, in my book, I don't speak about religion, but we move into people like Anthony Gramsci, who was Albanian and I believe is half Albanian, half Italian. But he lived his life in Italy and he was jailed for 11 or so years because he was all about communism and thinking about, he really was a philosopher, thinking about what does this mean? Why do people do what they do? So, in a way, his philosophy was about sociology or the behavior and study of how people act, what they do in a societal situation. And the big term that comes along with Anthony Gramsci is hegemony, which I'm not going to tell you the definition here because I actually don't know if I would say it exactly right on. But the idea there is it's about the haves and have-nots. It's about as the worker, John, I'll work for you, I'll hold you up, you'll earn all of this money, and I'll be okay because I'm earning just enough. And then all of a sudden, 5 years into that, I realized, boy, I'm not earning incrementally more, enough to really survive, but you're earning a lot. And so I yell out and say, hey, what's going on? And you respond by saying, in my book, I say, legalizing marijuana, doing something, you know,
Uh-huh.
giving access to a doctor, something that quiets the masses and gets them to toe that line. In the US, we can see that's the desire of what I'm understanding is we're willing to go back to training in school to make a worker so that the elites stay elite and the others can't reach beyond that. They're stuck in this. And that was Anthony Gramsci's frustration, is why do we do that? But he said, actually, we do it without bother to it. We just do it, right? But I think the stronger positioning is in my work, and there are some components there to get to this, but the result of my work is natural equality. That's what's achieved by my work if we apply ourselves to it. And the idea there is, Jon, you're built and you think and you do very differently than I do. I know when we hang out, we have a ton of fun, and I'm built and think and behave differently. I have different skill sets. And I heard a woman say the other day that there's this woman she knows, and when she comes in the room, she commands it, and she's blah, blah, blah. And then after she said all these like great things about the woman, she said she is kind of annoying. And that tells me that woman she's describing is in the model. When we're beyond the model, when we're outside of it, people receive us. We're calm and they feel that we flow. And as a result, the natural equality really comes from knowing what is for us and what is not. And we might think we know that now, but we don't, because this model is so ever present. So just to cap around, the beginnings of this, I think are very, very old, right? Primal, maybe, but I don't think that it is primary in us.
I'd be blaming the yawn, Amy. So when primates first started to yawn to signal it was bedtime to everybody else, is that one of the first examples of the model then?
Well, no, because that's empathy. Do you know that when people yawn? So that's how you can tell if you're dealing with a sociopath or a psychopath, is you yawn. And if they don't, there's a chance, especially if you think they are.
But that's to tell everybody in your group that now it's time to go to bed. We all sleep at the same time.
Right, but I would think that would lean more toward the pagan. It's an impulse in our body. But I think what you're saying, though, is that is free of the model, actually, because we're following what is true for us, right? And I don't think we're headed, I think some people think we're headed back toward paganism and being with the earth. I really don't think we are. And I believe, based on the pattern I see, we will move so far, so fast that we need to take care of the earth. I don't think we need to worry as much as we think we do. And that's really pushing into a weird zone. But once we clinch some of, I believe there are lots of people like me that are teaching something similar. Once we clinch some of those concepts to some degree, I think we're going to get how we surpass. I mean, we're playing so small. I believe that. I know I'm the weirdo.
But no, I mean, this is big, and there's a great example in your book where you're talking about a schoolboy who's struggling mid-season with his baseball team. Tell us about that, because that's quite a nice example of mother, father, child all working within and against the model.
Yeah, and I've had some people reading the book to give reviews, and I can't tell you how many mothers I've had say, "I wish I knew this years ago." And they have kids that are 35, or 20, or yeah, it's a good example, is right. The status quo is held up by us saying these rote statements of, in the US, probably in many places in the world, you made this commitment and you have to stay there for the team. But with that child, the situation was the child was out of their gourd, anxious, like losing sleep. They couldn't live and do their daily functions, as fluidly. It was on their mind and burdening them. And so the antidote there is to really take the cue from the child. And when the child was asked, what would you do about this? And the child said, I quit the team. And then, the parent helped facilitate how to communicate how that could work, but also said to the child, ask too, how will you feel about this in X amount of years, or when you're this age? And the child said, I won't even think about it. That's a great way to see it's not valuable to the child. And even though that child is bucking the status quo, which is awful, it feels awful to do that, because inside it signals to us, I might be isolated. What if there's nobody that will love me or be there for me, or that nobody will understand me, which, being misunderstood, is a tenet of malevolence. It can become disordering for us. So the child says all these things, and the parent is cued by me, unknowingly, but to say, I would rather have you recognize what it feels like to be anxious like this, so that you can recognize when you're 40 years old to stop working for a boss that all of a sudden makes you anxious, or stop being in that environment that makes you anxious. That's not a match for you. And now you know what that is.
Yeah.
right? So there's this beautiful lesson that comes behind it where the child's bucking the status quo, but they're doing it alongside the parent. And I said to all the people along the way, my friends and so on with children, that I wish that my children would do all of the things under my watch so that I could do exactly what happened there in the book, to
Yeah.
help the child learn about themselves, make informed choices for themselves, and stay with what they feel to let that guide them.
And tell me, how did the father react?
Awfully, yeah, awfully. And shaming and you're never going to be a success. You're going to quit everything in life. These are things, and in the book I say that's fostering exactly what we don't want,
Mm.
right? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy that the child will say, well, my dad will never love me. And it's very true for us. Acceptance is just so essential for us. And I know, I mean, that's the beauty of me, is I can endure not being connected, and it gave me privy to seeing all of these things, right? I did worry about not having connection, but I also didn't. I kept going, right? Because I knew I'd find new connection. I'm so friendly, but I think that's a terror for people is, will I
Yeah.
ever, yeah,
And I
have that?
think, Amy, it highlights really nicely. So we talk about the model versus knowing, and this gives an example. This has that attachment of when there are these negative emotions, when there are these controlling behaviors that are associated with that decision, don't quit. Do I quit? Do I not quit? That's a decision. But when the negativity is attached and packaged into that, this is a sign that you're on the wrong path, right?
Absolutely. And I'm writing a second book. I'm in process, but it's also the father dumping their own trauma onto the child so the child
Yeah.
carries the burden instead of the father recognizing and actively taking responsibility for their own trauma around this, that they'll have to face the team because they were still helping out, or that they had a problem when they were a child, that's mirroring this
Mm.
circumstance. Mhm.
And I think you're right. When you get into the world of work as well, cut forward 30 years, you
Yeah.
have tough times. Should I move? Should I change? Should I stick it out? This is when you get the big ones, burnout, stress, and so on as well,
Yes.
huh? Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you know it when you're young, you're more likely to know what to do, even though it feels uncomfortable, if you've practiced it when you were a kid. That's why having natural consequences when we're children is really essential for us to, and having some calculated risk. I think that that's
Yeah.
another piece. It really helps us mature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's lots of studies as well saying this is how millennials and Generation Z have this prolonged period of childhood, adolescence to cope with these more complex, demanding, challenging times as well. So to play for those future scenarios.
That's right. Exactly. So that children aren't getting into the drama of it, which is factless behavior. Because I see that a lot with parents, and it's they are well-meaning, but one form of the model or one side of the model is authoritarian control, which is what we see in fascism. I'll just say that, right? That's it. And anything underneath that that's like, I'm going to control you. No, you don't hurt. That's not happening for you. All of those pieces, right? But the other side of it is enabling, and we can have this other side in relationships, such as for children, most children have an experience that one parent is enabling and the other is controlling through authoritarian, right? And sometimes the parents will shift and do the opposite. It's based on their own trauma and their own inner children that are shut down. But that's not gonna. It's none of it is power, and that's the problem. Is if we're not showing our children power, we're
Mhm.
cutting them short. We're not letting them really mature, and we're not mature. And I get that. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about the enablement then, how this happens. So authoritarianism, obviously you see this as a kind of the stick and the beat, and you will not do this, but this
Right.
insidious enablement you also write about.
Well, right. And the other side of it is that comes through worry and through guilt and avoidance. But the avoidance in this case is self-deprecating avoidance. You might avoid others, but it comes into self-abuse of leaving a party and saying, well, I shouldn't have said that, or I did that wrong, and what's happening is you're not an empath taking it on. I don't really go with that, but you are in a situation where somebody is passively kind of dumping their emotions or abusing you so that you
Mhm.
feel insecure, but they're actually the ones that are insecure. And so these pieces, I really feel like the best way to say an enabler is somebody that worries. And that really is saying energetically, I don't think you can.
Mhm.
Right. And guilt says, I don't think you can, or I can, or, there are these pieces to it that come through. So that will make it, or will be good enough, or, it's all about what we isn't really true about us. But it has to be, when there's the authoritarian, there had to be this other piece that played with
Yeah.
it. And I think in a lot of cases, and no offense to men, but for some, many women and some men, they had to play that enabler role to keep the peace, which is holding up the status quo. And
Yeah.
again, energetically, or it's the time that we can set that down. But in the past, we really couldn't. It wasn't an option, or it just wasn't safe to do it. I tried a million times, and I was, I did
Yeah.
not have a good result. So yeah, the enabler is toxic in another way, because they have this intensity over the person. And like when a child's driving a car, that's scary when they're 16, and the US is when we drive in most states. And that's a lot of responsibility. But if the child is at a lot of natural consequences and they've had to think on their feet, you're not going to worry so much. But if you didn't give them any of that, and they're kind of, oh, you're going to worry. And actually, if a child has a circumstance where they have to think on their toes in an instant, that parent's worry, the child can feel that. Even
Yeah.
though we think, oh, I mean, how kids are, they're like, I have an ice cream eating problem. And you're like, I did secretly behind the scenes as a mom. So kids pick up on it, right? And that is where, in my work, I say you have to believe in them, and you have to deal with yourself behind the scenes to get right with that. And it might take you a week, it might take you 5 months, it might take you 8 years to get right with that, and believe in your child, or believe in a friend, or believe in others to, yeah, set that energy straight, so that they can take their consequences or not. They can handle it.
Yeah, superb. I think there were some really good examples that we had there. So thank you, Amy, for explaining those to me.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks.